Hello and welcome to our continuing series of legislative candidate interviews. I'm Mark Staples. I will be conducting the interviews on behalf of Bresnan Communications and Montana Cable Television Association. And my guests this morning are the candidates for House District 96. Teresa Henry is the Democratic candidate, and Carol Minjares is the Republican candidate. And I'd like to start by having each of you introduce yourself, and one of you or both of you could describe the actual geographic parameters of your House district, if you can, so that the voters actually know whether they get to vote. And I think we have a lot of voters that just say, well, I like that person, I'm going to go vote for them, and then they get there and say, oh, I don't get to vote in that particular race. So it's helpful for them to know what district you're running for. Carol, would you care to start?
Sure. My name is Carol Minjares, and I'm an attorney. I work for a local software company. And the district we're running in is very widespread. It starts up in the Slant Street area around the American Legion and goes out to the Franklin School area, the area behind the mall near the Welcoma Club, out to South Target Range, and then way down to Linda Vista and Miller Creek. So if you live in those areas, possibly you could vote for one of us.
Teresa?
I usually have to use my hands to describe it, and that is that it starts in the slant streets and jig-jags over to Reserve, heads down to South, and then goes all the way out to Blue Mountain Road, and then back around Blue Mountain Road behind Walmart to the railroad tracks. So it includes things like the Fort, Community Medical Center, Shopco, multiple pieces.
Now, this is an open seat, and you're both first-time candidates.
No,
no,
it's not.
I'm sorry.
She's incumbent.
Yeah, excuse me, Teresa. I apologize for that. The biggest issue, it appears, that one of you will face when you get to the legislature, and you can differ with me if you believe otherwise, but it appears to be that we have this rare convergence that's resulted in a $550 million surplus as of 2 days ago, and today it's now projected to be $900 million minus the reserves that they want to keep, almost $750 million projected to 2009, which is a tremendous change from 4 or 5 years ago. There are competing plans for the use of the surplus. Republicans have a plan called the Handshake with Montana, and the Democrats have one called a Square Deal for Montana. I'd like to ask you each whether you endorse your particular party's plan. You could maybe give a little of the ingredients of it, and or do you have your own ideas of what we ought to do with this welcome surplus? And Teresa, I'll start with you.
Okay. The amount of funding that we have available to plan through this next legislative session and biennium is, I was at a meeting this morning and somebody noted that there would be probably 5 requests for every dollar. I support in general the square deal, fair deal that Governor Schweitzer recommends, but my main focus is on funding some of the health and human services, and in particular prevention and early intervention activities to try to reduce some of the longer term costs, because I believe this may be a temporary response. We may not, I don't know that we are going to have this funding long term, and so I'd look at some shorter term investments.
Carol?
Well, I agree that the surplus of tax collected may not last. I think it's a product of the current oil and gas boom, increased corporate tax revenues and income tax revenues. But I think we owe it to the taxpayers of Montana to return a great deal of it in the form of income tax and property tax rebates in proportion to the amount paid, not just a flat rate for everyone, which is rather regressive. And I would like to see a small part of the surplus invested in MSU research and development because it has shown to bring such great returns.
We also had in the last session, I guess item one, as Teresa could avow, was education funding. In the wake of the Montana Supreme Court's decision that our education funding system for our primary and high school education system was inadequate. The legislature sought to address it and put an $80 million one-time cash infusion into the system, and then later in a special session put a $37 million cash infusion. There are those who have opined both politically and legally that that is enough and that that addresses the court's concerns, and there are those who say that it does not address the situation as it needs to be addressed. I'd like to get your comments on education funding in general, both K through 12 and college, higher education. And are we where we need to be, or do we need to do more, and if so, what? And I'll start with you, Carol.
I read that decision from last year, and it's a bit puzzling. Clearly, it's not what you spend, it's how you spend it. And this is a sore spot with me. I think a lot of the voters in my district I've talked to or surveyed, they're very suspicious about how the money's being spent, about the curriculum, how the students are being taught, what they're being taught, and the skills that they actually come out of school with. And so I think that we owe the voters some accountability for the money that we're throwing into schools. And I guess what it comes from is I would have no qualms about paying more if I thought all the students were being well educated, including the poor and disadvantaged students. But I'm afraid that a lot of students are being left behind, and just putting more money into the system is not going to solve the problem. We need to look as much as we can at the state level at curriculum and how the students are taught.
Teresa?
I think that we've addressed, and with some of the bills and discussions that have happened, and with some of the local discussions we've had, I think that we're looking at some of those curriculum issues and funding for specifically the Missoula area. I've talked to some people around the state about their issues around the rest of the state. For me personally, I think that as we said, there's 5 or 6 requests for every potential dollar, and I would see it as a possibility that we look at standing down on adding more to education at this point, unless it can be documented somehow that we have some specific need that we're addressing, and that we look at some of the other significant needs that we have. I think on some level it's like the Solomon dividing the baby. We've got X amount of money and multiple causes that deserve and would benefit from investment, and we've responded to this one, and I'd like to have us look at some other ones before we continue to invest in that particular issue.
One of the other discussion topics that you hear across the state is despite the surplus and the countering claims of who's responsible for the surplus and whose policies led to the surplus, we still hear a cry from both parties for what's called quote-unquote comprehensive tax reform. And that has many ingredients, from sales tax to, sales tax over my dead body, to local option taxes, to value-added taxes. I'd like to gather for our viewers from you your personal philosophy of the tax structure in Montana as it stands, how you would change it, if you would change it. Are there any places where we need reductions? Are there any places where we need increases? I'll start with you, Teresa.
Thank you. My general sense is when we talk about comprehensive tax reform, I can only relate to how I manage my budget or household budget, or in jobs that I've had where I've managed department budgets, where you have to figure out kind of the projects and expenditures that you need to have and balance it with the income. And I think that we have multiple sources related to taxation, and and it doesn't seem to reflect what we end up spending on the services. I think that we spend, we receive more than is reasonable from property taxes, but I'm not sure how else to balance those, because I think some of those services that are so important are what we want to spend funding on. My guess, or my recommendation when we talk about comprehensive reform is to say, okay, we have this much money that we'd like to raise, or this is the income that we would like to have, or this is what we will have. How can we divvy that up so it's coming from multiple sources? It's kind of like balancing a portfolio. We should have lots of opportunities where income is coming, and I also think that would then balance out the distribution of who pays for what in the state. I think taxation is part of living in community. It's the cost of all of us living together, and I think all of us should sort of pay for part of that ride.
Carol?
Well, first of all, I would like to see the equipment tax back on track to be totally eliminated to help business growth in this state. I think another thing we should do with that, it's not a tax issue, but is to look at the workers' comp problem. The rates have gotten so high that a lot of businesses are relocating outside of state to get away from it. But most of all, I oppose the local options tax that plenty of people are pushing right now. It can be a sales tax, and I've heard over and over again from my constituents, I'm sorry, not my constituents yet, sorry Teresa, but the voters in my district, through surveys and through door-to-door conversations, that they are almost totally opposed to any kind of sales tax, whether it's a state sales tax or a local option variety. And I think we've gotten used to not having one in this state, and I don't want to break that tradition now, especially if all the other taxes stay where they are or continue to go up.
No, how are we on time? The crew, I guess we haven't gotten a signal, so we'll take our time. Oh, we are at 5 minutes. With that in mind, what I'd like to give you is, we've talked about some general issues. Teresa, you've talked about some public policy and social service needs you think need to be addressed. You've talked about some changes that you think need to be made in emphasis on certain things. What I'd like to do is give you both an opportunity to close, take a few minutes to close. We have such a wealth of candidates, particularly in this county, but the viewer is going to have to walk into that booth in November and choose one of you. And so I'd like you to emphasize why you and not your opponent, and why you not your opponent. And in closing, also give us a sense of, if you're elected, what your emphases will be from a personal and constituent or voter standpoint. And I'll start with you, Carol.
Well, I have a legal and business background in local business development. I saw a business go from 54 employees to over 300 in the last 15 years. I saw how it happened. They did it without the benefit of a lot of government tax breaks. I was watching very carefully because I was curious about what does it take to make a business grow in Montana. I also have a lot of experience in government contracting around the country, and I've seen some awful red tape in states like Massachusetts and Maryland, and I don't want to see this happen in Montana, including sales tax issues in California, where even local government is not exempt from its own taxes. I'm also very concerned about public schools, as I said. I've been looking at some of the developments in curriculum around the country, and it seems like we're 10 years behind again. I would like to do something about workers' comp, and I'm also, for those of you who are concerned, I'm also pro-life candidate, and I support the institution of marriage, and I hope to be your representative in the future.
Teresa?
Thank you. I believe that I am a good candidate. I think running for office is like applying for a job, and I think I'm able to do this job. I feel like I'm reapplying when we run for office. I've got one sessions worth of experience of working as a legislator and learning that process. Previous to that, I've worked as, or volunteered as a citizen lobbyist on a lot of healthcare related issues through the Montana Nurses Association and because of other work that I've done. My background gives me some particularly, I think, appropriate transferable skills. I'm a registered nurse with 30 plus years of experience of working in all sorts of healthcare environments, and my graduate level degree is in occupational health. So I know, because I've had experiences of going to manufacturing plants and doing worker comp case management, I know you can be a, quote, good corporate citizen that provides jobs and benefits and assets to the community, and do so in a way that doesn't contribute to degradation of the environment. So I think that gives me a balance between some business development issues and healthcare and access. And what I hear on the doors are property taxes are high, and healthcare and access to healthcare is an issue. If I had my druthers and money was no object, I would make sure there was a school nurse in every school. I think that probably realistically what we will end up doing is probably needing to do some kind of a study bill to look at that before we can convince everybody that would be a good investment.
Well, speaking of the doors, and for our viewers who don't know what that's shorthand for, these candidates spend every evening of months up to an election going door to door. Unless there's a forum like this or an interview, they are burning shoe leather. You heard them discuss the parameters of that district, how large it is. And I just want to thank you two and all the candidates for the hard work you undertake to run for these offices. It takes so much time just to get involved, in money and effort, and then for your reward, if you get elected, you get to go to Helena and make incredibly hard decisions to a very demanding public. So on behalf of Bresnan, Montana Cable Television Association, and I hope the voters, we thank you for running, and to the voters, thank you for tuning in, and please do vote.